Hello everyone, I am Srishti Jain and I'm currently spearheading the financial club at St. Xaviers College, called as FinCell, where we work on the vision of spreading financial literacy. Today we have with us a really special guest for our podcast. He's one of the India's top investment expert, author of amazing books, and also popular for introducing the coffee can portfolio. Yes, he's none other than Mr. Saurabh Mukherjea, who is the founder and CIO at Marcellus Investment. In today's episode, we'll dive deep into his latest book, Behold the Leviathan, discuss some of his investment ideas, and also know more about his insights on where the Indian economy is heading. So, if you're just starting out or have been investing, this episode is for you.
Thank you. Thanks, Srishti. Thank you for inviting me. So I'll use a few slides to talk about our latest book, which, as you correctly mentioned, has become a bestseller. The idea for Behold the Leviathan came in Diwali 2021. So Diwali 21 was when, after a couple of years of working from home, we started traveling again. And as we started traveling around India, we started reflecting on what the country had achieved. And we realized what India has achieved over the last 10, 20, 30 years is actually remarkable. So on the screen, I projected the last 10, 20, and 30-year returns. These are dollar returns, total shareholder returns, TSR. These are the world's big stock markets. And as you can see, right,
Yeah.
for the last 3 decades, the only other market which really compares with India is the United States, right? No other large economy has been able to post comparable shareholder returns. Over the last 10 years, the Americans are ahead, 13% compounded returns from the S&P 500 versus 9 from the Nifty. But over the last 20 years, India is comfortably ahead. And as I said, over a 30-year period, basically over the last generation, we've been the only market that has been able to deliver dollar double-digit returns alongside the United States. In fact, these two countries deliver two-thirds of the world's stock market returns. And the question that we started thinking about from Diwali 21 onwards is, why is this? Why is India able to beat every other emerging market? As 2022, 2023 progressed, Srishti, as those years progressed, it became even more apparent how far ahead of other emerging markets India had moved. So if you look at the worm chart on the top part of the slide, India is the black line, right? And other major emerging markets in the world, Indonesia is the dashed red line. Indonesia is seen as a very viable, vibrant emerging market. You can see how far behind we've left Indonesia. And MSCI emerging markets, the main benchmark that the overall EM emerging markets world has, is MSCI EM. MSCI EM also is the light blue line, right? So in 2012, had you or I invested $10,000 in MSCI India, that would have become close to $23,000 in towards the end of 2024. So over 12 years, the money's nearly doubled. The money invested in India actually is more than doubled. $10,000 has become $23,000. But you can see that for the rest of the emerging markets, the $10,000 is pretty much $10,000. Baki EM, rest of the EM world has given zero returns, and India has more than doubled EM money. And more interestingly, if you look at 2021, the year after COVID, right? That's why I find 2021 so interesting. As we were coming out of COVID, is when India really breaks away from other emerging markets, right? And we said we need to get to the bottom of what's going on here. As we tried to understand this better, and as Behold the Leviathan started taking shape, right, and we started traveling around the country to understand why India has beaten all other EMs by such a handsome margin, we started realizing that there are small case studies in the country, right? Small mini Indias, which can help us understand why we've done so much better than any other EM. And the city of Bangalore, the greater Bangalore region, I thought was a fascinating case study. Behold the Leviathan book.
Yeah.
The book actually begins with Bangalore as a case study, right? And as we sort of traveled around Bangalore, we realized that even till the 80s, late 80s, even till the early 90s, much of the area around Bangalore was actually farmland. Paddy was grown there. Something called Electronic City. What is called Electronic City, the origins of it lie in the late 70s, early 80s. Early 80s was when those signboards were put up, right? You can see the Electronic City ka signboard, BHEL, Hewlett Packard. But through much of the 80s, it wasn't much more than a bunch of signboards. Electronic City remained a fairly muted concept through the 80s. Then in 1991, the Indian economy liberalized. P.V. Narasimha Rao ji and Manmohan Singh ji opened our economy to the broader world. The license Raj was scrapped. And post liberalization in 93, Infosys IPO'd. Infosys went public. Infosys used its IPO money to buy a campus, to buy land in Electronic City, right? So this is a pivotal moment. 1993, Infosys goes public. It raises capital, uses that capital to buy land in Electronic City, and that's the time when Bangalore takes off. Infosys setting up a world-class campus in Electronic City, in a way inaugurates Bangalore's boom. From 93 to the current day, land prices in Electronic City are up 300x. And as many of you now know, Electronic City has now become a vibrant area. Apple's iPhone factories, Apple now makes $30 billion of phones and pads, just a little bit south of Electronic City. It's the only other country in the world other than China where Apple makes phones. Almost for the last 3 years, almost all the latest iPhones are first made in Bangalore, and then they're made in China. And China obviously gets mighty irritated about that. Um, Over the last decade or so, high-class flyovers have been built, so Infosys had a critical role to play in that flyover on the top right. It's from a place called the Silk Board Junction. Silk Board Junction is still a notorious traffic black spot in Bangalore, but from Silk Board Junction you get this elevated flyover, which basically zips you straight into Electronic City. I think it's a distance of 15-20 kilometers. It is done in
Wow.
15 minutes,
Yeah.
and it sort of makes life easy for people to access Electronic City. Consequently, therefore, residential areas, shopping malls, etc., have come up. It's become a vibrant place to live in as well. Now, in Electronic City's evolution, you can see the winners and losers from India's story. The winners are obvious, right? The promoters of Infosys, the founders, the ESOP holders, right? Billions of dollars of wealth has been created for the shareholders of Infosys, for the staff who had ESOPs. By the way, much the same applies for, say, Wipro, Azim Premji, and the Premji family have become one of the richest families in the world, courtesy of Pro's success. Similarly, say a Titan. Titan is also based in Electronic City. Titan is owned 26% by Tata Sons, 25% by the Tamil Nadu government, 50% by shareholders like us. And Titan has generated 200x shareholder value in the last 20 years. So these company shareholders, Bangalore-based company shareholders, have become multi-billionaires, and employees have become millionaires. But who are the casualties here, right? So we're thinking about who loses out. Yeah. As cities like Bangalore, cities like Pune, cities like Hyderabad, Delhi, as these cities blossom, who are the losers here? Right? We go back to those farmlands. Remember, much of the area around Bangalore was fertile farmland, and most of it was farmed by farmers who didn't own the land. They were tenant farmers. So when the farmer sold the land to Infosys, the farmer made a killing. Infosys paid the farmer handsomely for the land, but the tenant farmer, the guy who was actually the guy who was actually cropping the land, he didn't actually get a payoff because he wasn't the owner. He was simply a tenant cultivating crops, and he would get a share of the crops as his revenue. So the tenant farmers, and most farmers in India are tenant farmers, they then lost their jobs. My initial thinking was that these guys would have got jobs in the broader Bangalore area in Hosur, which is an industrial area. But my co-author Nandita, who's Marcellus' economist, Nandita pointed out that there are very few manufacturing jobs in the whole of the country. I think in the entirety of South India, there's just 5 million manufacturing jobs. The odds of getting a manufacturing job are close to negligible in India, including in the most prosperous part of India, South India. So most likely, these farmers would have to go further into Tamil Nadu or into Karnataka, go some deeper into the countryside to earn a living. Right. So that's the first casualties. The landless farmers, and most farmers, remember, in India are landless, don't really get much out of these booming cities. As the cities expand and the city spreads further into the countryside, the landless farmer simply gets dispossessed and moves further into the countryside. But an even more interesting class of casualties in India, and an even bigger class of casualties from India's dynamic progress, is small businesses, right? So if you think about it, right, will a small business, a Kirana store, say, will a Kirana store earn a better margin in a vibrant city like Bangalore or Bombay, or will it earn a better margin in a village, right? So what is now currently Electronic City used to be a village called Konappana Agrahara, right? The Kirana stores in Konappan, the small businesses, their margins got decimated because in a large city, margins are much lower because the large city is far more competitive, right? So retailing FMCG goods is a far more lucrative proposition in a smaller village than it is in a larger city. And similarly, running, say, an auto rickshaw service is far more lucrative in a smaller city than in a smaller village than in a larger city. And this is one of the ironies of progress, that as you urbanize bigger and bigger parts of the country, SMEs profit margins get crunched, right? And if you then add to that e-commerce, Q-commerce, the Kirana stores, the small retail outlets, they get their profit margins completely pulverized by economic progress, right? And just keep in mind this microcosm of India, right? A few winners who are making billions of dollars or millions of dollars, right? A class of roughly 200,000, using income tax data we've shown in the book, that roughly 200,000, 250,000 individuals are making upwards of crore of income a year. My suspicion is crore is what they're reporting. I think they're making many millions of dollars a
Millions,
year.
yeah.
250,000 individuals in India are absolutely killing it. And much of the rest of the country is not actually able to participate in economic progress. That's how every country develops, by the way. As Nandita and I have pointed out in the book, economic development is a game where there are a few large winners and lots of chota losers, right? Now, just to move further ahead to contextualize this, right? The main point that Behold the Leviathan makes is through journeys like this, through journeys like Bangalore's development, India has changed its master narrative, right? Till the 60s, the master narrative used to be one of famine, of deprivation. It's unbelievable, but even in the 60s, we had two major famines in India. 70s brought the Green Revolution, MS
Yes.
Swaminathan and the Green Revolution. 1991, as I mentioned, brought the epic economic reforms of PV Narasimha Rao ji and, and Manmohan Singh ji. And then more recent years, the IPL, the launch of UPI in 2016, which has transformed payments, mission to the dark side of the moon, and then the world's youngest chess champion. I think when we wrote the
Yeah.
book, we were hoping Gukesh would win. Thankfully, after we published the book, Gukesh won. And one way to understand India's journey is to look at this chart in the middle of the page, right? So this is my favorite chart from Behold the Leviathan. It shows the number of deaths in India from terrorists, criminals, extremists, both civilian deaths and security forces, army, police, law and order people who died trying to save the civilians. If you see the those lines, right? Whether you see the civilian lines or the security forces line, those lines have trended down sharply over the last 25 years, right? Effectively, India has become a far safer place to live in. So just to take the dashed line, which is the number of civilian deaths, back in the early 90s, nearly 2,000 people used to lose their lives. 2,000 innocent civilians used to lose their lives every year from criminals and terrorists and insurgencies, atrocities. That number you can see, that number is now less than 100, right? 2,000 people per annum dying to less than 100 per annum dying. Our country's become a far more safer place to live in, and obviously for a society to move forward, the most basic prerequisite is life and limb have to be assured. India has done that as it has liberalized its economy. Confidence levels have gone up. Entrepreneurial spirits have been unleashed. And as I was saying, the stock market data, the corporate profitability data shows that we are in a different level to other emerging markets. Now, there's another way to see this, right? The government of India puts out plenty of high quality free data on its website. You just
Yeah.
have to use it. I just have to use it. Thankfully, in my case, Marcellus's economist Nandita does a terrific job of pulling out the government data and showing us how the country has changed. Right. So we focus on the chart on the right hand side. This is India's corporate tax data. Right. So just to set the scene here, what India's corporate tax data shows is there are 1.4 million companies registered to pay corporate tax in India. Out of those 1.4 million, 1 million report a nil return. So 1 million companies say कि boss पैसा नहीं बन रहा है, they report a nil return, right? That number's really doubled over the last decade, right? That gives you itself gives you a sense of how hard small businesses are hit by
Yeah.
economic progress. Of the remaining 400,000, 17%, the black line, right? 17%, that's roughly 70 or 60,000 companies, 60,000 companies out of 400,000. 60,000 companies are growing their profits at a rapid clip, right? These 60, 70,000 companies are growing their profits at 15% per annum, significantly faster than nominal GDP growth, right? So the black line is India's fastest growing 70,000 companies. They are growing profitability at 15% per annum. These companies account for nearly 90% of India's profitability, right? That black line, just 70,000 companies out of 1.4 million, account for 19% of India's profitability, right? But there's an even more dramatic way to see this, right? Out of those 70,000 fast growing companies, if you focus on the 6,000 fastest growing, right, the picture is even more dramatic. So to understand this, right, we then turn to a second data set called the CMIE dataset. CMIE stands for Center for Monitoring the Indian Economy, CMIE dataset. And what CMI's dataset shows is the fastest growing companies in India are not the largest, right? They're the second decile. So if you take the chart on the left, you'll see decile 1, the light blue line, is not the fastest growing line. The fastest decile is decile 2. Decile 2 is basically not the 1,000 largest companies, it's the 6,000 companies below the 1,000 largest companies, right? So preceding slide, the black line is 70,000 of India's largest companies. But within that 70,000, the most interesting lot is the top 7,000. Out of that top 7,000, if you bifurcate it further, the split is the top 1,000. We call them the rulers, right? The top 1,000 companies and the rulers of modern India. These are the giant companies who are listed, whose products you and I use every day. So Unilever, Asian Paints, HDFC Bank, ICICI Bank, Reliance, etc. These 1,000 companies account for 2/3 of India's profits, 62% of India's profits. But their profit growth is a mere 15%. The more interesting category is the next 6,000 companies, right? The 6,000 companies, we call them challengers. That's the decile 2 that I was focusing on, right? The challenger companies, their profits are between 50 crore at the smaller end, at the lower end, and 500 crores at the upper end, right? Or $6 million to $60 million, right? The challenger companies' profits are growing over the last 4 or 5 years at 25%, right? This is the most exciting part of the Indian economy. The challenger companies account for around 22% of India's profits. The rulers, remember, the big boys, the big companies account for 62%. That's 900 companies accounting for 62%. But the really exciting companies are the next 6,000, the challenger franchises. They're growing profitability at around 25%, and they account for a little over a fifth of India's profitability. This is where the deep disruption in the economy is coming through. Yeah. Beyond that, iske niche, below the top 70,000, it's really difficult out there, right? There are, as you can imagine, right, up to 1.4 million companies, only 70,000 are really flourishing, right? Below that, it's really tough out there, and that's the story of every country's economic development. A few large companies will do really well. In India, the rulers are the big boys. But the good news for us as a country is we got another 6,000 companies who are doing exciting work coming through. And the challenges are going to take on the rulers. They're going to attack the rulers over the next decade through better business models, through the use of the internet, through the use of mobile, through the use of intellectual property, clever business processes. And in the book, in Behold the Leviathan, we've fleshed this out further. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go into all the themes. But the 5 themes around which we have fleshed out the book, the 5 themes around which India's progress is being built is, firstly, women. Women are now far better educated than men. So at every level of the schooling system, and including university. So primary school, high school, and into university, there are more women studying than men. Women's pass rates are much higher. Then we've shown they're getting the best jobs because they're far more literate, far more qualified than men. And then we have shown that the data from the mutual fund and the banking system clearly shows that women in urban areas now have more money than men. We also said the next 10 years really belongs to women. Indian men, for a variety of reasons that I explained in the book, Indian men are falling further and further behind. The Indian economy is actually structured in a way which is very women-friendly. And women will be by far the dominant force in terms of earning money, setting up businesses, generating wealth. And therefore, we as investors, we as portfolio managers in Marcellus are very focused on deepening and building out a women clientele. The second thing we've shown in the book is opportunity has been democratized in India. So Nandita did a brilliant data crunch which showed that for the first time in Indian history, the majority of the folks running the Nifty 50 companies are neither from IIT nor from IIM, nor do they have a foreign degree. They're regular graduates, right? An exemplification of this would be, say, a company like HDFC Bank, which is basically CA chartered accountants educated in the University of Mumbai. The third thing we're showing is that the peninsular states account for a quarter of the population, half the GDP, and two-thirds of the GDP growth. Our country really is about the peninsular states. The rest of the country isn't really doing much. If the peninsular states you add Gujarat, that's basically two-thirds of, that's actually 75% of India's GDP growth. Leaving aside Gujarat and peninsular India, it's really difficult to see how the rest of the country is going to actually move forward. Why is it that northern and eastern India finds it so difficult to participate in economic progress? After all, northern and eastern India have the same IS officers, the same electoral system. Why is it that 75 years after independence, northern and eastern India find it so hard to participate in India's progress? Northern India really has only one prosperous belt, which is NCR, and to a lesser extent the area around Chandigarh, right, the greater Chandigarh, Mohali region. Uske alawa, northern India is really, really tough to see development, and that's not for lack of infrastructure. Many of the northern Indian states have put up really good infrastructure. They've invested in schooling, but ho nahi raha hai unka economic growth, and I think should be a source of subsequent economic research by people who have more resources than us as to why do northern and eastern India, why do they fail to participate? We've given our reasons in the book, but someone who's got more resources should look further into it. We've spoken about China's unraveling and how big an opportunity it creates about India. And finally, you highlighted that with the Western world not having enough white collar labor, all manner of Western jobs, right? So not just IT, finance, marketing, strategy, HR, accounts payable, all of that is moving to India by the truckload. Every week, two global capability centers are opening. When we wrote the book, this number was 1,700. Now we learned that last week, India now has 2,500 global capability centers. These are well-paid jobs, and increasingly these jobs are no longer in the crowded cities of Bombay, Bangalore, Delhi, Pune. They are increasingly in cities like Nashik, Coimbatore, Tirunelveli, where standards of living are better, house prices are lower, traffic is less, and so on. So the book goes on to flesh out all of these aspects of India's progress. I won't have the time to get into it. I'd strongly recommend whoever's watching read the book if you can. It'll give you a ringside view on why India has become the fastest growing country in the world.
So with the book launched in October, I think around me personally, I would say that many students have started, reading this book because they just felt that they can now understand that how it transformed and where is our country actually moving towards, right? If you understand the deep roots of it, then you will be able to innovate further. I think that's the motivation that the current students are
Nicely,
getting.
nicely
Yeah.
put, Srishti. Absolutely right, right? So one of the things I've always felt is rather than taking received wisdom. And the received wisdom when I was growing up, when I was your age, was you have to migrate to the West and live over there.
Yeah.
Thankfully, your generation has a more realistic perspective on life in the West. But even now, right, I see a lot of Indian students say, यहाँ पे graduation करके let me do an MBA abroad, see if I can spend a few years abroad. Um, I think it's extremely expensive. If you spend your 20s and 30s abroad, you're going to miss out on a generational economic development story. I'm not saying life in India is a bed of roses. To succeed in India, you have to have extreme levels of work ethic. You also have to have entrepreneurial zeal, right? I don't think everybody's born with. I don't think everybody's born with entrepreneurial skill. I certainly wasn't. But if you have the enthusiasm to build something, this country is extremely fertile place for starting up a new business. Over the last decade or so, it's become easier to start a new business. It's not effortless, but it's become far easier to start a new business in the last 10 years or so. And I think economic opportunity abounds in our country. So for your generation, for my children's generation, my hope is you guys get a world-class education, either in India or abroad.
Thank you,
But
sir.
then make this your karma bhumi. Make India your karma bhumi. I think this country will repay your faith in the nation very handsomely.
Yeah. So, sir, when you are talking about, even in your book, you have mentioned about the startups and companies that are doing quite well. You mentioned that 70,000 out of several companies have grown to that extent where they have like sustainable profits and the others lack. So, what do you think what is that thread that connects them all, like the successful companies, or what is that mantra that if a company follows, definitely that company is going to be successful?
Right. So firstly, let me just caveat that, right?
Yeah.
Um, across the world,
Yeah.
including in India, the vast majority of startups will fail, right?
Hmm.
That's how free market capitalism works. So one simple way to understand how free market capitalism works is look at a sports tournament, look at say IPL, look at Wimbledon,
Okay.
right? The Wimbledon winner will take home 50 or 70x the prize money of a first round loser, right? So it's called the theory of tournaments, right? Any free market is organized like this. The winner will take away all the spoils pretty much, and जो second third place पे होगा that guy will get a little bit,
Hmm.
and जो 10th के नीचे होगा उसको कुछ नहीं मिलेगा,
Yeah.
right? That's how the corporate ecosystem also works, right? So there are, for example, there are, I think, 40 banks in our country, 40 scheduled commercial banks in our country. But the top five will account for 90% of the profits from the banking system, right? That's how free market capitalism. And same for startups, whether it's in the United States or India, the vast majority of startups will amount to nothing, right? Now, the question you're asking, Shrishti, is a clever question. You're saying, those who win,
Yeah.
what's common to those who win, right? And from what I've seen in life, what I've written about both in Behold the Leviathan and I've written about this in more detail in Unusual Billionaires, is that there's broadly three aspects that I see successful entrepreneurs have. And increasingly, this is women entrepreneurs. Women entrepreneurs are increasingly being more successful in India than men. पहला है the ability to manage multicultural teams. Right, gone is the era where I'll say, boss, I'll only work with people from Bombay or people from Delhi or from my community only, boss. I don't want to work from people from other parts of the country. If you want to succeed in modern India, you have to be able to work from people from different parts of the country, different religions, different cultural backgrounds, right? So the successful leaders are able to do that almost with a degree of effortlessness. They meld into the different cultures that our country has, right? Second thing is, they might not be techies, but they understand how technology works, right? I don't need to be a semiconductor engineer, but I need to understand the basics of semiconductor design. Not because Marcellus will be producing semiconductors, but if I don't understand how semiconductors work, I'm not able to understand the use of modern technology. Right? I don't have to be an expert in CRM system, customer relationship management system, but I have to understand the basics of how Salesforce works, right? So the second aspect I've seen with successful leaders is they have a grasp of how modern technology works, even though they might not be techies themselves, right? And you can understand that the underlying character trait is curiosity. Right? एक जानने की इच्छा होती है, boss, how does
Yeah.
semiconductor design work?
Hmm.
Why is it that a 6 nm semiconductor is more powerful than a 30 nm semiconductor? Right? फर्क क्या है और 4 nm इतनी powerful चीज क्यों है? And the third aspect is the ability to see the world a little differently from other people and thus spot opportunities, entrepreneurial opportunities, business opportunities that दूसरे लोगों को नहीं दिखता.
Hmm.
If you see the world the same as everybody else, no, you see the world the same as everybody else, तो फिर आपको कुछ opportunity खास दिखेगा नहीं, और आपको ये opportunity दिखेगा कि 50 और लोगों को दिखेंगे, and you'll run after the same damn thing that everybody else is running after, right? उसमें कुछ खास मजा नहीं आता. The ability to see the world differently, the ability to spot opportunity when nobody else does, is, I think, the defining trait of entrepreneurs the world over. And if you combine that with ability to work with multicultural teams and the ability to understand the use of modern technology, I think those three are the central character traits. Um, there's a lovely book called Zero to One. It's in my bookshelf. It's one of my favorite books, Zero to One by Peter Thiel. And those who like reading should read Zero to One. 2 घंटे में हो जाएगा काम, बहुत अच्छी किताब है. And there's also a YouTube webinar that Peter Thiel did at Stanford on the same book. The webinar, just go to YouTube and put in "competition is for losers." वो अगर आप डाल दो, "competition is for losers," it's the same book but in webinar form. In 1 घंटा, Peter Thiel gives you a master class on how to think
Hmm.
about seeing opportunities when nobody else does. Right? So these are the three things. I mean, if it was easy to manufacture these three traits, तो सब जन के पास होता. But a lot, and I don't think there's any education system which produces these three traits.
Yes.
If someone says early on in life at the age you guys are at, कि मेरे को करना है ये, and you start cultivating these three traits, I think it becomes far more likely that you'll have those traits by the time you are in your late 20s, early 30s.
Okay. So that was like, it was just outbreaking or mind blowing, to be honest. I think many students after watching this will start working definitely on the three traits who wants to bring an impact within the country or within the world. Moving on, while you were writing this book, you already mentioned that what intrigued you to, start to write on this book. But what was that, like, one impact or one misconception or any finding that you, like, just surprised you?
I'll give you one negative finding and one positive finding.
Sure.
The negative finding is, I think, the decimation of small businesses in our country, right? The data, the government data is actually very clear. The vast majority of small businesses have had their lives pounded in the last decade, right? And it wasn't. I sort of knew in the abstract that demon, GST, COVID, say SMEs have been hammered, but I didn't know the scale of it until Nandita did the number crunch and showed that basically 1.39 million businesses account for 1% or 2% of India's profits, right? We have 1.4 million companies registered to pay tax. Effectively, आपका 50-60 हजार कंपनी कमा रहे हैं. 1.34, 1.33 million companies are making barely any money and they're just about getting by. I didn't realize the extent of pain in the SME system until we did the number crunching for the book. This is, by the way, in the last chapter of the book. We call it creative destruction. We use Sagar Manthan as a analogy to explain क्या हो रहा है. Churn हो रहा है. छोटे companies are getting killed. Bigger, successful companies are being born. And then on the positive side, the positive surprise was how the IIT, IIM, and overseas educated elite are increasingly getting marginalized in our corporate community, right? Because the popular perception is, अरे सब जन ही IIT, IIM से हैं या विदेश में पढ़ाई किए हैं. But increasingly, the data shows that in both in the venture capital context, in the startup context, and also in the boardrooms of the nifty companies, elite education is kind of yesterday's theme. Elite education से कुछ खास फायदा आपका हो नहीं पा रहा है modern India में. So that was a surprise for me. And in fact, to be honest, even university education per se, after publishing the book, we've been looking at this issue in more detail. There's very compelling data from multiple sources which suggests that even university education adds no value. So the best thing to do is finish class 12 in India and काम करना शुरू कर दो उसके बाद, because the data is very clear. Class 12 is your optimal level of education. उसके आगे पढ़ाई is a kind of fruitless search for useless credentials.
So, like in India, don't you find it more tough? Like, I just passed from 12th standard 3 years back, 2.5 years back, and getting into a job. After undergraduation, also, most of us don't find it like a good job where we get a good role. Either you need to just tag behind you have to just perform the knacks of all the corporates, or either you need to just start thinking that what do you want to do. You're in that stage where you're quite confused. So, what do you think that a student like me, an undergraduate student, how one can actually start working and what all things we can explore into?
I think good point. I mean, I agree with you that most corporates will say graduate degree लेके आओ, but I'll turn it on its head, right? This year, 2024, so we're talking in 25. In 2024, 90% of graduates didn't get a job. Nearly 40% of IIT graduates didn't get a job. Even those who got a job, including IIT graduates, are getting very low salaries after, I think IIT में तो 4 साल पढ़ाई करना पड़ता है.
Yeah.
And after rewarding yourself for 4 years at IIT, you're getting paltry 3-4-5 lakh ऐसा कुछ मिल रहा है, right? And as I said, even in the IITs, a big chunk aren't getting jobs, right? So first thing to be clear in our heads now is that university credentials are not actually worth much. Job market is saying, in fact, now there's long time series data showing that university credentials are not worth much, right? Now let's integrate this insight with what you know, which is सब जन बोलते हैं एक degree लेके आओ. So I think the logical thing to do is finish class 12, get employment. The employment could be, being a salesperson in an electronics store, or being a a cashier at a fast food store, but get employed as quickly as possible, and then do a degree, a BCom degree or whatever, bachelor's, BA degree in early morning or early evening, right? Because the data is very clear. The quicker you start working in India, rather than hankering for education's credentials, the better off you are, right? Now, if you come from a business family, it's easier for you because you can start working in the family business at the get go. I mean, get a degree because, as you said, the degree is like a sign of hygiene. right? कि पढ़ा लिखा इंसान है तो डिग्री कहीं से आप पालो उतना मुश्किल नहीं है डिग्री पाना but don't waste 3 years 18 19 20 or 18 19 20 21 or don't waste 4 years just studying because उसका pay off the data is like उसका pay off खास है नहीं right? So a degree in our country doesn't have a financial payoff. It's like a hygiene thing. Both I suspect in the marriage market and also in the job market. Like वो social status के लिए लोगों को चाहिए कि ये फलाना इंसान graduate है. But job market data is very clear. कोई pay off नहीं है. So start working quickly and do a degree. और जो तरह सुबह 8 से 11 पढ़ते हैं या 6 से 9 पढ़ते हैं. BCom, all the chartered accountants do that. They study from some really early hour till 10 o'clock and then they go off to work in their CA firms. Either do that or do an evening college. Right? There must be both options available, but don't spend 3 years just doing full-time पढ़ाई. उसका कोई payoff नहीं मिल रहा है इंडिया में.
Sir, you have mentioned about certification like CA. Now even CFP is coming into like it is at a very nascent stage. CFA most of them are doing. They are getting to know about this. I'm myself a CFA level 2 candidate. So what do you think? The source is really important. If you don't know the implementations properly, then
So again, so let's step back. The credential per se, I'm not so sure इसका कितना value है, right? When I was your age, I also got the CFA, but I used to study on the local train for the CFA. हो गया thankfully, right? But I'm really glad I didn't sort of take time off to study for the CFA. So local train में सुबह शाम पढ़ता था, हो गया उससे, right? It's the knowledge which is far more important than the credential, right? The credential beyond the credential is kind of hygiene thing. कि इंसान में बेसिक अकल है इसको हम इंटरव्यू कर सकते हैं.
okay.
The credential per se is not going to take you very far, whether it is CA or CFA or CAIA or कुछ भी CCC, right? उसमें आपको all you're telling the world is I've got the basic credentials to apply my mind. It's a hygiene thing. It's not a make or break thing, right? It's a necessary but not a sufficient condition for success in corporate life. Any of these C wala credentials is a necessary but not sufficient condition for success, right? And therefore, the best way to do it is, you guys, I think you're doing it whilst in undergrad. So undergrad के साथ साथ कर लो CFA. It's a good thing, but also get work experience going as quickly as possible, right? I think that's the main point I've learned from the job market data crunches that we're getting. Get work experience going, fatafat, because that's the real value add that you add to yourself. Remember, you asked me what defines an entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
And आपको तीन चीजें बोली, right?
True.
Multicultural teams, entrepreneurial insight, and the ability to understand modern technology. None of that is going to come from sitting in a classroom.
Definitely. So do you think that education system should tweak a bit?
हाँ जी, it's a massive overall education system.
Yeah.
I think hopefully people at the highest levels, because what our education system is teaching by and large is rote learning. AI makes rote learning irrelevant.
Fair enough. Coming back to your book, I had like 2, 3 questions upon that. You mentioned about the transforming role of women, right? You mentioned that how women startups are scaling, but there are some things which are like contrasting to this, like the women workforce participation is going low. If you just talk about the oppressed castes also, and the rural areas also, though they are integrating digital soon or slowly adopting the digital solutions, still there are some places where they are just struggling with unemployment post governmental schemes. So what do you think upon this? The pace at which we are going at right now, is it substantial to overcome these disparities, or do we need to look into some systematic segments that would make changes?
So first of all, right, the female labor force participation rate, right, FLFPR, has
Yeah.
improved dramatically in the last 5 years. Right?
Uh-huh.
It's gone from I think 20 to 35. Right,
Mm-hmm.
still low by Western standards, but we are now up there with many of the other Asian countries. Right. Dusra cheese, right? Remember, I said more women are studying
Mm-hmm.
than men, right? And this is true in university as well. So if more women are studying till the age of say 24, 25, naturally they're not in the labor force, right? So if you adjust for this now, right? So Nandita did a adjustment. She's shown in the book that if you adjust for the fact that increasingly women are taking to college in far greater numbers than men and emerging from college with better marks than men. If you adjust for that, then India's FLFPR is actually comparable to many of the East Asian countries, right? This is true for the urban FLFPR. Now, rural में issues है, but again the rural issues are on the mend, partly because of UPI and India's stack. So increasingly, what we are seeing when we go to rural areas is the men are, for whatever reason, unable to work or unwilling to work. Right? The women are using UPI India stack to say either make achar or papad or some sort of processed agri product, and they're selling it in their district using e-commerce and getting paid on UPI. Right? So in the sort of posh flats of Bombay, women are selling cakes and salads on a large scale, and selling corporate lunches and corporate meals at a large scale. But the same analog is also taking place in more modest homes in rural India, right? Misho is the translation of this on a large scale, right? Where when you go to small town India, Misho is a steady source of earnings now for women, right? And the third aspect of this that we're increasingly seeing is businesses run by women for women. So beauty parlors being the quintessential example. So we start chapter 4 of my book. Chapter 4 of the book is my favorite chapter. We start that with a news report from India
Yeah.
Today, which is about I think 12 ladies leaving their houses after receiving PM Awas Yojana ka payout, right? And they basically eloped with other men, much to the chagrin of their husbands, who reported it to the local block development authority, who promised to investigate it. I don't know how they investigated it. If 12 women leave with other men, what exactly are you supposed to do about it? But I think it exemplifies for me how women are saying we've had enough of this nonsense, and they're saying we'll sort our lives out. UPI and the political system is helping them find freedom, find financial muscle, and they're using their brains and their education to move ahead in the world. So काफी subversive है हमारा देश actually, right? And the rise of women has many subversive elements to it, which I find delicious, right? And it's happening not because of कोई social सुधार हो रहा है, कोई एनजीओ आवाज उठा रहा है, कोई नॉट फॉर प्रॉफिट बहुत कुछ कर रहा है. It's happening because of free market forces. The free market is saying हमको रिसोर्स चाहिए, हेल्प चाहिए, supplies चाहिए, and the women are saying through internet, mobile data, and through UPI, we will supply and get paid.
Okay.
Right? And they're able to do so because they've been educated to a pretty decent standard, whereas the men have been spending their time, God knows doing what, watching IPL on mobile, free mobile or something like that.
That's incredible. Like the women growing in India, and as you mentioned, the next 10 years would be like a women decade.
Yeah, so the men who are watching this will probably find chapter 4 uncomfortable, but I think I would suggest them it's required reading for them because it will give them, if you're a male person and you want to set up a business, think about building businesses which cater to women, because all the money in the next 10 years will be going to Indian women.
So, there are companies that are associated with women usage products, right? And would you recommend that including such companies in your portfolio would be great? Like as you mentioned that
Yes,
the
so,
women is
I mean, look, I
growing.
mean, it's not the world's best kept secret, right? So we invested in Titan many years ago.
Yeah.
Titan's been a big part of our portfolios. Titan's, as I said, made 200x in the last 20 years for shareholders. Similarly, we invested in a company called Rainbow Hospitals 2 years ago. It's a maternity-only hospital, maternity, obstetric care, and pediatric care. It's run by obstetricians and pediatricians, but mainly targets the working women in southern India.
Yeah.
In Southern India as well, working women professionals are in the greatest number, and they're happy to pay 1.5 lakhs for child delivery. And Rainbow Hospitals in Meda has made a lot of money for its shareholders and for us along the way. But there'll be many more opportunities, right? It's not just a question of Nykaa and Mama Earth. There are many more Nykaas and Mama Earths coming through where profitable business opportunities focused on women are going to get built. Many of these companies are going to be coming through the startup ecosystem. Many of them will probably be created by you and your fellow peers, you and your peers, Shrishti. And it's something that both public market investors and private market investors are now clued into. In fact, many of the best VCs and best public market investors are also increasingly women, right? And the reason for that, I have to say, as a man, is women seem to understand women-centric opportunities better than men. Perhaps it doesn't come as a surprise to you, but it came as a surprise to me that men innately fail to understand what businesses, what products and services will appeal to women, and naturally, therefore, some of the most successful VCs and public market investors in India are increasingly women. And Bollywood reflects, or cinema reflects this aegis, right?
Yeah.
2024, almost all the runaway hits was not some Bollywood blockbuster by some
Hmm.
swaggering man fronting the show. There were movies with women protagonists and often movies made by women directors with a woman cast, the character as the central character of the movie, right? And I think the change you had, it's a deep change, it's a profound change, and it's going to be very difficult to pull this back. Again, I'm not a sociologist. I'm not quite sure I understand fully what's happening to Indian men. But what's clear is what's happening to Indian women is they're taking a rocket propelled path to financial freedom and corporate success.
So, starting with the first scenario, with the Indian rupee hitting a record low against US dollar. So, what do you think are the strategies for mitigating that can be applied by the policymakers or the individual investors when we think about?
Yeah, so the rupee should depreciate against dollars. Historically, any emerging market which grows fast, any EM which grows fast has to see its currency depreciate against slower growing Western countries. The reason for that is simple. So it's called the Samuelson-Balassa theorem, right? It's one of the oldest theorems in economics. So when you have a fast growing country,
Okay.
right, that's if economic growth is 6-7%, naturally the services piece is also growing at 6-7%, right? So for example, my barber in the suburbs of Bombay, he can see the Bombay ecosystem flourishing. Naturally, he's hiking the prices of its haircuts. But haircuts can't be traded, right? Haircuts can't be traded across borders. So that does generates inflation,
Hmm.
right? As you grow a country fast, it generates inflation in the services sector that pushes up a developing economy's inflation above inflation levels prevalent in the West. And since India's inflation is typically 3% higher than Western inflation, more specifically American inflation, the Indian rupee has to give up 3% of its value to the dollar each year. It's been like that for since 91. It'll be like that for the rest of my career. Right? There's no great alarm to be generated here. Saying rupee depreciate कर रहा है, कुछ पंगा हो गया, government को गाली दो. There's no need for that. It's a natural outcome. If the Bombay economy, the Bangalore economy, the Pune economy is growing at a rocket-propelled rate, right? Actually, Bombay, Bangalore, Pune economies are growing more like 8-9%, not 6%. Okay? That's real. Spin up inflation add karo, so that's more like 13-14% nominal. So naturally, the services vendors, right, the lady who cooks for us, the guy who drives our car, in सबका salaries बढ़ रहा है because the overall economy is flourishing. But my cooking skills can't be arbitraged across borders. The Microsoft Surface on which I'm talking to you, can be arbitraged across borders, but not the barber or the cook services. Right? That generates inflation, which in turn means the currency has to depreciate to compensate for the inflation. There's nothing alarming in that. Right? All you and I have to do is do sensible investing, clean, well-run, high-quality companies. If you or whoever is listening is very alarmed कि बस रुपये घुस जाएगा, $100 हो जाएगा डॉलर पे, then buy companies which are focused on exports, right? So in our portfolios, we have plenty of companies who are focused on exports and thus generate dollar earnings. And those dollar earnings will naturally, when translated back to rupees, do better if the currency depreciates faster. But this is one of the oldest kind of concerns that people in India have is rupee ghus jayega, kya karenge? There's nothing to worry about. As I showed you, on डॉलर रिटर्न्स मतलब रुपी का रिटर्न ट्रांसलेट करके डॉलर में dollar returns, we've been amongst the best performing markets in the world over 10, 20, and 30 years, second only to the United States, which suggests the country actually has done quite well and will continue to do well.
That's quite an insightful thing. Um, Moving on. So there was this one more news that was flashing in Mint article. Corporate borrowers have initiated 2025 with record-setting bond sales. Now, we have seen that in foreign economies, there is more proportion of bonds than equities, but in India, it's reverse, right? So, what do you think? What does that indicate, this new trend?
So look, in an equity bull market, naturally the cost of equity drops. Right? So simple तरीके से सोचिए, in a bull market, PE multiples go up. The cost of equity is PE inversed. So E by P is the cost of equity. ठीक है? So जब bull market हो रहा है, PE is going into the sky, cost of equity is dropping. Equity is available सस्ता. When equity is available sasta, what does everybody want? They want sasta equity. A promoter wants sasta equity. Right? So bull market there will be more equity issuance than bond issuance. Right? In a bear markets typically are accompanied by recessions. Recessions में central bank rates घटाता है. Right? So the cost of debt drops in a bear market. So in a bear market, the cost of equity is high, the cost of debt is low. So bear market में bond issuances होता है, bull market में equity issuances होता है. Nothing alarming there. This is all sensible, par for the course stuff in India.
That was incredible. So there is this hot topic, which is coming with over like 2 years. This has been talking about AI and big data integration. Like I haven't seen a single video not talking about this. So what do you think when implementing this into the finance sector, and what changes you'll be looking into it post 2030s?
Yeah, so look, I mean, it's already happening in our country, right? Most of our large lenders will lay off large numbers of people in their credit underwriting teams. I think the insurers will also lay off large numbers of people in their insurance underwriting teams. I think most people in call centers are going to have a tough task holding on to their jobs. Similarly, many coders, the IT companies, the coders will have a tough time holding on to their jobs. So it is relatively clear that AI will question the existence of up to a third of jobs in our organized sector. But by the same token, AI will also create new jobs, right? And three sets of new jobs which are coming through rapidly are firstly bot training. So if you're gonna get rid of the call center staff, and call center में bot answer करेगा phone, that bot has to be trained, right? Not just India के bots, the whole पूरे world के bots are gonna get trained in India. So on any given day, 2,000, 3,000 bot training jobs are coming into the market. In fact, the challenge is that not enough bot trainers, jobs तो काफी सारे हैं. Secondly, the gig economy, which is already 10 million people, will easily become 20, 30 million people, right? As your generation will say, हमको quick commerce में सब कुछ चाहिए. Your generation is not gonna forget going to the store. आप लोग तो 5 minutes ज़्यादा wait भी नहीं करोगे, right? Now to preempt what does Srishti need in her suburb of Bombay at 12:15 p.m. on a Saturday, right? You need AI. नहीं तो पागल हो जाएगा ना company. They have to figure out आपको क्या चाहिए before you order it. And that'll be AI analytics again. That will help the जो भी Blinkit या Swiggy, Instamart जो भी आपके लिए quick commerce करेगा, उसको AI use करना पड़ेगा so that they get figure out before you order it that you will need it, right? So the rise of QCom will be adding, I think, another 10, 20 million jobs to the gig economy. So that will become a new source of jobs. And तीसरा is the rise of influencers and YouTubers, right? So already in India, digital advertising spend is half of mainstream advertising spend, right? So अखबार और टीवी का जितना है, digital उसका आधा है, and influencers earn आधा of the digital advertising budget. मेरे ख्याल से mainstream advertising खत्म हो जाएगा, वो सारा budget digital advertising में आ जाएगा. But digital advertising is inherently linked to AI, right? Because companies will want to advertise, say, if you're selling clothes to young people, fast fashion to 21-year-olds, you need AI to figure out कौन सा fast fashion दिखाना है किस दिन में किस cohort को, right? So as advertising, as mainstream advertising on TV and newspapers and out of billboards dies, and advertising moves by and large into the digital domain, that will create enormous amounts of work on figuring out how to deploy the digital advertising dollars. And linked to that will be the ascendancy of influencers, right? So already India has 80 million YouTubers, of which the top million are earning some like 15, 16 lakhs a year. The
Okay.
top 50,000 are earning some like a crore a year, right? So already we have 50,000 YouTubers earning a crore a year or more. So ये वाला cohort बढ़ेगा, right? Because if advertising moves away from being a Bollywood star advertising some product on a billboard on the Western Expressway, and it comes to your phone, naturally on your phone, when they are targeting Srishti or Saurabh, they will have an influencer that they know you or I identify with. So in my case, the influencer will be some middle-aged man or woman selling a product that middle-aged men like me need. Right? In your case, it'll be a younger influencer who they know will appeal to you. Right? And figure out which influencer to plug into which customer. They'll use AI. Right? So पूरा नया world बनेगा at the moment. So whenever you have new technology, there are two effects. वो substitution effect बोलता है जो पहले होता है, where the insan gets substituted by technology. Right? That's what we're
Technology, yeah.
living through. 2 to 3 years out, we'll see the complementarity effects, which is technology enables the creation of new jobs. So आएगा वो 2-3 साल wait करना पड़ेगा. 2-3 years I think we'll go through job market losses courtesy AI. And then we'll see the creation cycle kick in. I suspect 2 साल से ज़्यादा wait नहीं करना पड़ेगा. पूरा creation का नया cycle आएगा. But it'll mean that a lot of old skills, credit underwriting, insurance underwriting, they'll become redundant. Repetitive skills will become redundant. Secretarial jobs, bank teller का job, security guard का job, जो भी repetitive काम है वो AI खत्म कर देगा.
So don't you think regulations will come? Like जो भी jobs redundant हो रहा है उस पे regulations आ जाएंगे
No,
AI के
government
related.
नहीं करेगा. The government knows better than to mess around with corporates, right?
Yeah.
Remember, it's ultimately corporates who give the donations which finance politicians' campaigns. Corporates will tell the government कि boss तुम मेरे को क्यों dictate कर रहे हो who I employ, I don't employ. You let me be, let me make a ton of money. I will donate liberally to your political cause. And I think that piece is relatively well enshrined in Indian life. I don't think any political party is going to say हम AI का इस्तेमाल रोक देंगे, बैन कर देंगे. That'll be, if whoever says that, उसका टाइम हो जाएगा, तुरंत खत्म हो जाएगा.
Such political instability will impact India, but with Mr. Narendra Modi being our Prime Minister, we have seen a huge growth. So,
Yeah.
what is your take on that? Like,
So last 10 years have been good. The 10 years prior to that was also good. The date again in the book we've given decadal data. Four phases may be broken up India. Till 1991 we struggled with the 80s thankfully being better than the awful 50s, 60s and 70s. Our 90s were better than the 80s. The noughties were better than the 90s. And the last 10 years have been all right compared to the 4 to 14 era. So last 10 years have been good. But as I said, India's story is not of one man or one woman. It's a story of different layers of leadership coming through and driving this country forward. So I'd hesitate to attribute India's success to any one person or one party or one community. I think it's a story of 1.4 billion, 1.5 billion now, 1.5 billion people gradually emerging from the ruins of colonialism, where the British took us to the cleaners in the 200 years to 1947. And when they left us, a lot of people don't realize it, and we try to explain this. When the British left us in 47, we were half, our per capita income was half of that of East Asia. We were the most ravaged of the Asian colonies of the British Empire. And the task of rebuilding India fell to our freedom fighters. Whilst a lot of people seem to have a lot of choice words for our freedom fighters, the people who ran India in the immediate years after 47, I think by and large they did a decent job. Could they have done a better job? Yes, they could have done a better job. Hey, in their shoes, would we have done much better? I'm not so sure. But India's rebuild started gathering pace through the 80s. Confidence started emerging. The economy started getting liberalized in the 80s. 91 was a remarkable watershed. All credit to P.V. Narasimha and Manmohan Singh for having the courage to liberalize the economy. The economy then took off. 4 to 14 was probably the golden period of growth for us. Both stock market returns and GDP growth did excellently. The last 10 years have been a great period of consolidation. But as I said, we have to remember that सबका साथ सबका विकास किसी emerging market में नहीं होता है.
Okay.
Japan didn't develop with सबका साथ सबका विकास, neither did Korea, neither did Taiwan, neither did the United States. Economic development is a journey where a tiny class of people, the smartest, hardest working, luckiest people, get super enriched. And then you have a large group of people who have not done so well. And the government's job is to equalize the fortunes of the super enriched people and the not so lucky people. And that equalization of fortunes, if it takes place through a high class education system, through good healthcare, high quality law and order, and good infrastructure, if that equalization between the winners and losers takes place through enlightened policy intervention, then the country keeps progressing for centuries.
Yeah, it was great, sir. Thank you so much for taking your time, and it's like, I mean, it's so good for a student to get some knowledge from financial expertise like you.
Thank
I
you.
think,
Thank you for hosting me and
yeah,
wishing you and your fellow students the best of luck with their
yeah.
studies. I hope you guys do really well in life.
Thank you so much, sir.
Bye for now.
Same to Bye bye. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. A huge thank you to Mr. Saurabh Mukherjea for sharing his insights on Behold the Leviathan and his thoughts on investment. I hope you all found this conversation inspiring and impactful as I did. If you all enjoyed this episode, please stay tuned for the upcoming podcast. Thank you.